And then we found out that Jake the Snake Roberts is the second inductee, announced for the WWE Hall of Fame class of 2014. He joins the Ultimate Warrior, two legends from my childhood, both very deserving. So that may explain why there was no Rumble cameo for Jake. And Jake has come a long way. We all know the story. He's cleaned up his act. I mean, he's had a few slip-ups, and he may have more in the future. But by and large, he is doing as well as he has done in probably most of his adult life. And a lot of that is due to DDP's intervention. And if anything, I would have DDP do the induction for Jake at the Hall of Fame. I think it would be appropriate. By the way, on the DDP front, totally having nothing to do with any of this, I saw that DDP is going to be on Shark Tank, which is that show on ABC where you make a pitch, whatever your invention or your product is or your service, and they're looking for investors. See, this is how they could have done this with TNA. They could have had Dixie Carter go on Shark Tank and be like, I need a new investor. Would one of you be my new investor? Maybe Mark Cuban could have been the new investor in TNA. You see, there's some cross-promotion there. That would have gotten TNA on ABC, would have given them some exposure. I'm thinking too much about this. But DDP is going to be on Shark Tank February 21st. When the show comes back, he's going to be pitching DDP Yoga on the show. So anybody who's a fan of Shark Tank like I am, or just wants to see what happens, that's on the 21st. You could check that out. Back to Jake. He has come a long way. He was knocking on death's door plenty of times in his life. There was a moment on this show many, many years ago, one of the early sound-offs I did when I was going off on Jake and I was going off on Scott Hall, who also seems to be doing very well now thanks to DDP. And I said I didn't think Jake Roberts was going to live another 5 years. I thought within the next 5 years, Jake the Snake was going to be dead. And I'm sure Jake the Snake felt the same way. Jake has done interviews where he says, I can't understand how so many of my friends and so many of my colleagues over the years who did a lot of the same stuff that I did, the drugs and everything else, they're gone, and of all the shit that I've done, I'm still here. He can't even understand it. But he is. And he's looking good, and I'm happy for him. I'm happy to see him going into the Hall of Fame. I'm happy to say I was wrong. He has turned his life around. He's turned a new leaf. And that's really, really cool. And Jake is one of those guys who did not need to hold a championship to get over, or to stay over, for that matter. And he's more than deserving of a Hall of Fame nod, even without holding a belt in WWE. He was never a top guy, but he was always near the top. You know, his feuds with Ricky Steamboat, Ravishing Rick Rude, Andre the Giant, Ted DiBiase, of course Randy Savage, my favorite. He did have a pay-per-view main event in WCW one time with Sting. I think it was that coal miner's glove match where his own snake bit him on the face at the end of the match. Legit, and he had to pry it off. He never worked with Hogan, aside from some house show matches. They were partners at Survivor Series one year, but that was about it. And I've always been intrigued by the Hogan-Jake thing, because I remember hearing about the angle that was shot when Hogan was in the midst of his run with the belt. He was at the peak of his popularity during the Hulkamania boom. And Jake was a heel at the time, and there was a segment that was taped. And I had to search for the date, but I thought about this before, and I looked it up, and it sounds like it would have been November 23rd, 1986, on Wrestling Challenge. So this did air. Jake interviewed Hogan on his Snake Pit segment. That was his interview segment at the time. The idea was that it would set up Hogan's next feud with Jake, because Hogan needed a heel to be fed at the time. The problem is, when the segment was over, Jake laid Hogan out with the DDT. And people in the building cheered. Maybe not everybody, but enough to where it was very noticeable. And Hogan and Vince McMahon freaked out over the reaction, and they nixed the whole feud because the last thing they wanted was for Hogan to get booed at the buildings and for Jake to get over as a babyface. So they killed it to protect Hogan, and they turned Roberts babyface. A couple months later, that's when they did the angle where Honky Tonk Man just killed him with a guitar shot over the head. That gave Jake pretty serious neck injury, and I don't think he ever really fully recovered from that. I'm not sure if the guitar wasn't gimmicked or if Honky was just being reckless, but, I mean, it was a brutal shot. Anyway, as best as I can tell, the segment did air on Challenge, but what they did in most markets was they cut the segment off at the point that Hogan walked off the set. I think he got all upset over his questions or something like that, and he walked off. That's what most people would have seen. Live in the building, the segment continued. And Hogan came back and he got DDT'd, and I believe the one market where the full segment did air was on television in Providence, Rhode Island. Because Hogan and Jake had some house show matches in the Providence market coming up after the segment aired, and they left it in there for those people to help beef up ticket sales for those events. That angle set up those matches in the Providence market. I think they had a match in December. I know there was a match in January of '87. That's it's in the house show records if you look it up. I find this all fascinating. I'm a wrestling nerd. What can I say? Hogan versus Jake would have been a cool feud had they given it a chance. You know, you do that match today with Hogan as the Superman babyface and Jake as the heel, and I guarantee you the crowd turns on Hogan and cheers Jake. I mean, that goes without saying. But I mean, this was in 1986. I mean, that was hardly an era of smart marks and internet fans and all that kind of stuff, and they cheered Jake when he laid out Hogan. So I wish that full segment was available online somewhere. I'm kind of surprised they didn't put it on the Jake DVD they put out many years ago, Pick Your Poison, which I have a copy of. It's actually very good. I'm surprised they didn't put it on there as an extra. You know, it is super, super rare stuff. So maybe one day we'll see it, maybe on the network. You know, if they want to put some really rare stuff on there, that would certainly qualify.